First off, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the MSP Chat Podcast, your weekly visit with two talking heads talking with you about the strategies, services, and success tips you need to make it big in managed services. My name is Rich Freeman. I'm a co-host of this program. I am also Chief Content Officer at Channel Master, the business responsible for this fine show. I am joined by your other co-host, my friend, my Channel Master co-founder, Eric Simpson. Eric, you're in Southern California. I'm here in Seattle. Is it getting nippy down there?
It's getting cooler, Rich. I think it's 67 degrees, the high today, it's dropped probably 10 degrees from a week ago today. So yeah, it's getting a little bit chillier. How about in your neck of the woods?
Well, it's definitely been almost wintry here this week, but this 67 amuses the heck out of me, Eric, because earlier today I was doing an interview with some folks from Barracuda about some news that they have coming up. Two people on the call with me, both in Southern California, and they were both bundled more than I was here in Seattle. And I was asking, hey, has winter arrived in Southern California sooner than here? It was 67 degrees probably when when they did that. But, standards differ. That's just kind of how it goes.
Yep. And you're a little bit north of me, so you're probably, a few degrees even colder.
Yeah, well, I mean, I haven't actually looked at the temperature today. Yesterday, the high was 42 here. So that, it's getting
42. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, I'm not complaining. I'm just saying.
All right, folks. Well, let's dive into our story of the week. This is news that will have broken a little while ago by the time our audience is listening to the show here, Eric, but it's going to kind of segue us into a larger topic. And so the news hook here is that SonicWall, very popular, familiar security vendor, has acquired Solutions Granted. Also a well-known, highly respected vendor among MSPs. So SonicWall, still to this day, probably is most closely associated with firewalls, but they've been building a much more complete, diversified portfolio of products for years now. And particularly this year, they've been building out that portfolio. And I can tell you as a fact that by the end of this year or early next year, they're going to be adding SASE and SD-WAN to their portfolio. They've got some news along those lines coming up. But now, sooner than that, they've acquired Solutions Granted, which provides managed detection and response services to MSPs. So SonicWall now offers MDR. And as it happens, Eric, I'm actually writing this week's edition of my blog, Channelholic, about the rise of MDR, which suddenly, at least in the MSP world, has sort of become the hottest acronym in security. And there are plenty of acronyms in security, but it's all about MDR right now. Not even just within recent years, but within the last 3 or 4 months. ThreatDown, which used to be known as Malwarebytes for Business, introduced a sort of EDR, MDR hybrid. Sophos introduced an incident response service. They've had MDR for a while. WatchGuard introduced MDR, and now SonicWall has MDR. And it feels more and more like security vendors all want to have it and feel like they need to have it. And the reason for that, basically, interestingly enough, the reason isn't so much that the threat landscape has grown worse. The threats themselves are about as dangerous as they've ever been, but there are a lot more of them. There are a lot of tools in the average MSP stack, kicking out lots and lots of alerts, lots and lots of log information. And as we all know, it is difficult to get tech talent of any kind for an MSP. It's particularly difficult and expensive to get tech talent with security expertise. So basically, you've got a lot of MSPs who are drowning in threats and information about those threats from their security tools. They are understaffed. They don't have the people on board who can interpret that information from their tools, and they may or may not be able to monitor and manage all that input 24/7, which increasingly is required by compliance standards and upstream vendors and cyber insurance companies, et cetera. So there is a huge and growing appetite for some kind of managed security service that MSPs can outsource to security vendors. And we've seen a lot of vendors just this year, just in the last 6 months, respond to that growing appetite. And I really do feel, Eric, before very long, you're going to have some kind of outsourced security service in every security vendor's portfolio, unless they're really kind of focused in on something very, very specific.
Yeah, Rich, it's pretty much table stakes now, right? I mean, and in your article in Chowaholic, you interviewed the CEO of SonicWall, and he had some really interesting insights about, the I I don't know if I want to call it a pivot, but the new direction and the acceleration now that SonicWall is experiencing, moving into more of these types of services, when in their history they haven't really been adopting this approach in the past. So, can you share some of that?
Yeah, and I mean, this is a very interesting story about SonicWall. So Bob Van Kirk is the CEO of the company. He became CEO about 14-ish months ago, right now. And right out of the gate, when he came in, he knew that he wanted to build a much, much bigger, healthier MSP channel for SonicWall. SonicWall has had an MSSP channel for a number of years, and they would use those MSSPs as a sort of route to get to the MSPs, but they didn't have a lot of direct relationships with MSPs. And they decided they were going to work on that. I remember interviewing Jason Day, who is, I think, their CRO, and he told me that this was going to be a big priority in 2023. We have had, in fact, I think it was on the very first episode of the show, Michelle Ragusa McBain, as an interview guest on this show. She is now the global channel chief. She was originally hired specifically just to spearhead that MSP initiative. And so they're very much thinking, they're looking at the world through the eyes of an MSP at SonicWall these days, and making sure that they have the offerings that an MSP needs. And that includes these days MDR.
Yeah, and again, they're certainly becoming more and more, I think, brand aware in MSP's minds now, as their as their MSP channel program strategy, branding, and awareness program is really, moving into full swing.
Well, we will have links to more information about this in the show notes, for you to follow up. But let's move into your tip of the week, Eric. And we're still a few weeks away as we record this from Christmas, but we're all getting into that giving mindset, and I think that has something to do with your tip of the week.
Yes, that's a great segue, Rich. And this week's tip of the week is all about leveraging LinkedIn for lead generation in a different way than what many of us experience today, Rich. I mean, if you're, and I know you are, if you're like me and are connected to a lot of folks and, are pretty visible in the channel, you're probably getting bombarded with a lot of, in mail and sales pitches, and it's very, very spammy and direct. Now, these are folks that aren't necessarily connected to us, but want to engage with us and pitch us on things. And so they're using these in-mail credits in LinkedIn. And it's becoming so noisy. And I'm glad that LinkedIn has this, kind of other tab in your messages, where you're kind of focusing on the things that the messages from the people that you're connected with. And then this other tab, which is mostly where all this spam ends up. And LinkedIn, no doubt, is one of the best platforms for MSPs and other business folks to go in and do lead generation and connect with folks. But to use your segue properly, instead of, I want to stop pitching and start giving, right? So there's the connection there. So instead of pitching, here's a strategy that's working really, really well for the MSPs that I work with and we use at Channel Mastered to engage with folks. And it's one that's simply about identifying the folks that you want to engage with, and then following them and seeing what they're doing in LinkedIn. Now, if you pay the, plus or minus $80 a month, you can get the LinkedIn Sales Navigator component, which is really, I highly recommend it. It allows you to search and filter through the entire database of everyone on LinkedIn. So you can really target the folks that you want to engage with, Rich. And not only that, but you can also turn on a little filter in addition to identifying their geography, their title, their role, how many employees are in the company and things like that. But you can also toggle on a little switch that says, have they posted on LinkedIn within the last 30 days? And so once I'm done filtering everything, I switch that on because now I'm looking at what they're posting. And these are the folks that are most active on LinkedIn, which means they're probably the most responsive to, any kind of a connection request or anything else you want to do. Now, again, in the strategy of giving, what I want to do is I want to find folks that are posting. I want to look at what they're posting, and then if I'm not connected to them, I will I will do a connection request, but I'll add a note that says, hey, thanks for sharing that article. And then I will ask a question about something in that article. What are your thoughts on this? And let's connect and send that connection request. And that is going to have a much better chance of somebody responding and going, oh, here's what I think. Yeah, they'll accept my connection request and reply. And now I have an opportunity to follow them more closely. And then I can now begin to give. And what I'm doing is I'm going to find other articles around the things that they're posting. And then I will say, hey, great article. Here's something that I thought you might be interested in. So I want to use a kind of a 4-to-1 ratio. And this comes from Andrew Smith, one of our channel master digital marketing gurus. And he says, look, 4-to-1 means I'm going to give something of value 4 times before I ask for something in return. And so I'm giving some information. I'm engaging with them and I'm saying, hey, at some point I'll say, let's have a chat, right? Can we get on a quick call? And so this is a much more effective way, Rich, to engage with someone, to like and comment on what they're posting once you're connected with them, to ask engaging questions, and then to encourage them to take a call with you when you can kind of, hey, let's explore how we can work together. Be candid. At that point you can be candid, but I'm not spamming them. I'm not sending them 14 paragraphs of my company and how I want to engage with you. And then, Rich, extra bonus tip for extra credit. I used ChatGPT and Copy.ai to do a lot of that work for me. By identifying other articles, I'm using ChatGPT or Copy.ai to go search the internet, find articles that, talk about this thing that is appealing to probably a large segment of the folks that I'm trying to engage with. So it's good for a lot of, repurposing. And then, give me 3 bullet points and give me a link to the article. Boom. And now I have something that I can say, look, here's something that I thought you might find of interest. And it kind of helps speed things along. With great power, AI, generative AI, comes great responsibility. So when used properly for research and things like that, it certainly speeds this up. And then I set aside so much time, several times a week, to do those things. And now I have a schedule and I'm building a pipeline of opportunities that pays off over time, Rich.
I love it. I love all that. So first of all, that is a perfect example of the right use, the smart use of AI, right? Where you're accelerating something that doesn't require a tremendous amount of expertise, basically. And as long as you're doing a little follow-up, make sure that the links and the bullet points that you're getting back from ChatGPT are legit and so on. You can really save yourself a lot of time without cutting corners or sort of undercutting your value proposition to the customer. And then I love that sort of go-giver approach to building relationships with sales prospects because it's such a diametric difference. I like you, I get messages from people in LinkedIn all the time who very, very clearly are just trying to sell me something. And I don't even respond. I don't look and so on. If you are the person who is trying to make a personal connection and sharing useful information, it just creates an entirely different impression with people and makes it much easier for you to have that conversation with them. And the other thing that I've heard from MSPs is even if you're not into the 4-to-1 ratio, if you just kind of keep sharing, eventually what happens if you're an MSP is there is a security incident or there's a complaint, a problem with a company's current MSP, and they need somebody new, and they think of you because you're the person who's been sharing all this really smart information with them. So, it could be a nurture marketing kind of strategy as well, to just stay in touch with people, share valuable content. Even if you don't proactively reach out, some of those folks on the receiving end will get back in touch.
Yeah, and it's about creating those relationships, and as MSPs, as MSSPs, I mean, we are, trying to differentiate ourselves from being kind of the reactive transactional firefighting resource. And so you're absolutely right, Rich. When we're delivering that, truly, kind of thought leadership content, getting them to think differently, and of course, you're going to, you know, lead them towards you, the more that you reach out to them and try to explore opportunities to work with you. But you're absolutely right. If they're the more that you learn about them and the more that you're engaging with them, then you can actually curate even more valuable and targeted content. And I know it sounds like a lot of work, Rich, but if you're doing this, 30 minutes a day, a couple of days a week, um, you know, and you're leveraging AI properly, right? And then, like you said, checking those links, because there are a couple of AI platforms. I use 3 or 4 different ones, and some of them will just make up links and stuff. And it's the copy looks great, but when you click the link, it doesn't exist. So I don't know what's going on there. But yeah, do your research, use it properly, and leverage it to your advantage. And then you're creating those relationships, like you said, the Go Giver concept. That's a great book. If listeners haven't read the book, we highly recommend the Go Giver. It's a parable about instead of being a go getter, a go giver, and the benefits and the value proposition there. So that's the intention here, is to be seen as a thought leader, be top of mind. And sometimes it's kind of just it's a timing thing, like you say. Oh wow, I'm not happy with my current provider. I know Eric's been messaging me. I think I will take a call with him, or I'll reach out before he reaches out to me, because that happens a lot too.
All right. Well, great stuff. Thank you, Eric, for that. We are going to take a quick break here, folks. When we come back on the other side, we are going to bombard you with voices, but you're going to be very glad that we did, because I'm really, really looking forward to this interview segment that we're going to be doing with Alex Farling, Kyle Christensen, and Wes Spencer, the 3 co-founders of Empath. Empath is a relatively young vendor that makes a learning platform for MSPs and their employees. Those are also 3 of the most informed security experts in the managed services world. We're going to have all of them on the show with us in just a moment or two, Eric, and should be a very interesting conversation. So stick around, folks. We will be right back. All right, welcome back to part 2 of this episode of the MSP Chat Podcast, our Spotlight interview segment. And we are absolutely thrilled to be joined this week, not by 1, not by 2, but by 3 certified security experts. This is going to be an awesome conversation. So settle in for a lot of talk about the state of the security landscape and the skills gap in security and other related topics. So with us today are Alex Farling, Kyle Christensen, and Wes Spencer of Empath. They also do all sorts of other things as well. Let's go ahead and meet them. Alex, you first. Tell folks a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so my name's Alex Farling. I've been in the MSP space for what feels like my entire adult life. I spent about 16, 17 years owning an MSP. Towards the end of that run, I started a little company called Lifecycle Insights that was since acquired by ScalePad. We helped MSPs do BCIO and account management and all the client-facing reporting that is really hard with the tools and systems we have today. And as that was kind of winding down, Wes and I got together and started putting together this harebrained idea for Empath. And we realized we needed a smart guy with us, so we went and got Kyle. And here we sit today. So that's the short version.
Well, let's cut straight to the smart guy. Kyle, tell folks a little bit about you and your background, what you do.
Those are some big shoes. But yeah, real similar. My entire adult life, which has been 3 years, has been in the MSP channel. I started in Best Buy Corporate in 2004, figuring out the Geek Squad rollout. Real quickly figured out what hyperscaling was, and our biggest bottleneck was always getting people in the door fast enough and trained quick enough to not have to look for unicorns. And from there, I got a couple MSPs said, hey, can you do that for me? and we turned them around. One was a 3x growth in a few years, and the other one was a 5x growth in a few years. So the hyperscaling idea came around this recruitment strategy. Later on, I actually, with my EOS consulting background, I helped co-founded Sierra Pacific Group, a quite large MSP consulting firm. I exited that last year when Alex and I had this crazy idea of what does MSP education look like? And it was a question and a problem that I just obsessed about. And that's when I got brought in with Wes, and we just all kind of said, let's just do it.
All right. Well, I want to talk more about that. But first, Wes, your turn. Tell folks about you, your background, what you do these days.
Yeah, thanks, Rich and Eric, for having us on. This is a blast. So, I'm a little different than both of them in that I've never actually worked at an MSP, but I'm a cybersecurity nerd, have been my whole career. And I'm actually an educator at heart, and even spent about 4 years, I think, as a professor of information security, and got burnt out of that because of the red tape and the bureaucracy. And I didn't want to go the whole PhD deep research track. And so I traded some stints in banking, and then eventually after that, we started a company called Perch Security, Aaron Chernin and myself and a few others. And, we built that company, a cybersecurity company for MSPs, way before cybersecurity was important for MSPs. And so we actually had to lean on our education chops and say, how do we teach MSPs and their clients why this matters and why they need to take proactive countermeasures, and they need to actually assess themselves. And of course, what we saw from 2018 onward, with threat actors really targeting MSPs like never before, it was a good thing that us and a number of others that were in the industry all were there at that time, because things kind of went haywire and off the grid for a few years. And so Perch got acquired by ConnectWise in 2020. And so now I trade my time doing all sorts of things. I do a lot of advising, but also one of the co-founders at Empath. And as Alex and Kyle both said, we're really excited about helping MSPs standardize and bring accountability into upskilling and reskilling, and really help them grow into the future, which I am very optimistic for 2024 and beyond for MSPs.
So Empath is a pretty young company. I'm going to guess that there are plenty of folks in our audience who are new to it, unfamiliar with it. Alex, I will randomly go to you here. Tell folks a little bit about Empath and what it does, its mission.
Yeah, so we're trying to revolutionize the way revolutionize the way that MSPs do training today. You talk to any random MSP and you'll say, how many training portals do you have across all your vendors? And they'll tell you 37. How useful is that to you when you hire the kid from Starbucks or the AT&T store and try and get him off on a good leg, his first week at work? Well, it's not really useful. I have to go to the training portal. I have to see if everything's changed and moved. I have to go figure out what's still relevant. I have to cobble together things out of 27 portals to try and get this guy to understand stuff. And then, well, we don't really use ConnectWise the way that the ConnectWise training uses ConnectWise. So then I have to go tell him, well, thanks for watching that training, but we do it all different. And so we're trying to give MSPs a place where they can build their own training, their own upskilling and education, but also customize it to the user, because not every employee in an MSP is in the same place, right? Some employees are already a tier 2, but they want to be a VCIO. Some are a tier 1 and feel stuck and want to go into sales. There's a different learning journey for every single person there. And we're trying to take that into account as we build this out so that MSPs can actually sit down with their team, invest in one-on-one career coaching, and help them identify what a career looks like as an MSP or as an employee at an MSP, instead of just breeding more of these young nerds that are really angry and go rant on Reddit about how terrible it is being, just ground up and spit out by MSPs. So we really want to build a place in a way that MSPs can upskill and train and invest in employees to make them feel like part of something bigger, as opposed to just grinding through them.
Eric, I believe you are muted.
So that really hits home for me, Alex and team. And boy, what a brain trust you guys have collected here together on this mission. What you're talking about and you're focusing on is helping these MSPs really build a succession strategy for their staff. I do my fair bit of consulting with MSPs too, and the first thing that we look at from a growth perspective is, what does the organization look like? How many plates are everybody spinning on sticks, right? How many hats is everybody wearing? And looking for that growth and succession strategy that gives employees a sense of, oh, wow, here's the roadmap that I need to take in order to compete for these positions, and then have, the commensurate compensation that comes with it and the responsibilities and all that. And you know, uh, the first challenge is really getting them trained into that role. So I really appreciate what you guys are building, and having, being a recovering MSP, as I am, I see the value. How do you communicate that value to MSPs? Because, we're fickle, right? As MSPs, we're putting out fires, we're shooting from the hip, we're reacting a lot. I mean, there's this journey toward maturity that every MSP goes through the longer they're in business. And sometimes, the best strategies kind of, aren't really, identified early enough and acted upon because they're so busy. So how do you impress the value of what you guys are delivering to the MSPs and get them to adopt it, I guess, is my first question.
So I'll take the first part of that, if I may. There's a lot of data that we're starting to learn around all of this. This whole world of like upskilling, reskilling, this concept of if we don't find a way to have infinite pipeline, then we die. We actually recently did a whole talk on that at IT Nation Connect, and it really resonated really well. And one of the things we did is Eric, we showed some statistics. One is LinkedIn did this study of many thousands of people and discovered that 91% of, actually, I think it's 94% of employees say, I would have stayed at my organization longer if they had invested in my career development, if they had given me some kind of pathway, some kind of opportunity. It's not just about the money. It's pretty important. And then Forbes did a study. I think it's somewhere around 218% more expensive to go and take a new employee and get them up to speed from the employee that walked out the door. And so you think about that, but you also think about, for MSPs, this is actually a problem that you can solve for. Think about Chick-fil-A, think about Disney, two companies that have epic world-class customer experience and capabilities of onboarding with deep metrics and knowing when I can put them out on the service floor, so to speak. Well, why are they so consistently good? Especially given that their pipeline is usually people with zero background. No, they're not coming from expensive jobs. They can go to Harvard. They came from again, Starbucks, AT&T store. And so I think for MSPs, you should think about this, and you should salivate at the mouth thinking, you know what? If I can even just do 1 to 5% of what Chick-fil-A is doing, what does that mean for me when I can go hire from anywhere that I'm at? I have infinite opportunity. And I think the problem that exists is talent really does exist everywhere, but opportunity does not. And so I think if MSPs can take the bull by the horns and say, we're actually going to do this, we have the ability to have infinite growth and infinite pipeline. And yeah, people are going to walk out the door for higher salaries after 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Fine, great. Let them go. Celebrate that. Use that as a bragging point, because you got a ton of new folks waiting in the wings, just itching and ready to come into your org because of what you've been able to do. To me, that's the pitch.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Wes. That positions it, broadly. So let's hone down into one specific opportunity that we're all very aware of, is this, not just the overall skills gap that we have, but specifically the gap with cybersecurity and cybersecurity professionals. So, how large is that skills gap? Do you see that as a low-hanging fruit kind of entry-level opportunity for Empath? And how are you building out, capabilities to support MSPs that are trying to move into more of a cybersecurity first, relationship with their prospects and clients?
I hate to keep hogging the mic, but I'll take the beginnings of that, and then Kyle and Alex, please jump in. So we do know there's a huge cybersecurity skills gap. There's actually a nonprofit called CyberSeek that tracks this, just globally, not including just the channel, but globally. There's about 1 million filled cybersecurity job placements, but there's over 500,000 openings, right? So 50% is the gap there, is the delta. So there's no question there's a huge, huge pool of open opportunities. But I think for MSPs, it gets even more interesting, because we don't really think about MSP jobs as being like classic cybersecurity jobs. And yet, if an MSP doesn't fill the role of cybersecurity for the SMB, nobody will, period. At the end of the day, MSSPs are largely too big to come down market, and SMBs themselves don't have the budget and resources to go hire those people. So actually, I think that that number is quite a bit higher. So there's a pretty significant skills gap that does exist from just the hiring capability. And then what does it take to get an employee up to speed when we assume they didn't go to college for cybersecurity? And even if they did, it probably fills 5% of the knowledge they need to have, not the practical hands-on, hip to hip training that it takes to really get good at cybersecurity from a practitioner's point of view.
And if I could comment on that as well, Eric, I've been fortunate enough over the years to work with hundreds of MSPs, and as a growth and scale guy, I really don't see the cybersecurity problem any different than the IT help desk problem. Because ultimately, your team, the people that come to work for your organization, they're a product on a shelf. And I have to have that product available to grow my organization. So I always allude to, right, sales is the number one bottleneck of most MSPs when it comes to growth and scale. But what real quickly they learn is that recruitment becomes your next bottleneck in growth. So you get this start, stop, start, stop, start, stop environment, because by the time you sell enough, everyone is waving their arms saying, oh my God, stop selling, because we're just trying to catch up with our backlog. Our work in progress is building up. We got all this cash on our balance sheet that's not hitting our P&L. Well, what happens is as you grow faster and faster, you need to start having inventory for someone to take off the shelf and purchase faster. So whether it's cyber or help desk or VCIO, I need to make sure that I have product that's in development, that's on an assembly line, getting ready to be put into a package so someone can purchase it. And that's the big difference with cyber is there's not that inherent entrepreneur founder knowledge of what that product looks like. So what has to happen now is you're trying to build a product that you don't even have a vision for ultimately, right? You're just going off of what the zeitgeist is telling you to build. So in order to your initial problem, your initial question of what becomes that end value for the MSP that's always in the weeds, is we need to get that IT help desk product so refined and so assembly line and so automated that that owner can start now to get above water to say, what is my cybersecurity product going to be? And then it's typical MVP. It's agile product development. It's let me get to where that is consistent so that I can now go ahead and put consistent product on the shelf for cyber.
Well, and in order to get there, this is the problem we saw at Lifecycle Insights. Every single MSP is struggling with how to take that product and go explain it to a customer who doesn't understand flux capacitors and all the fancy widgets and gadgets that are in cyber today, right? So we have to train an entire team of salespeople to go out and have the conversation at the executive level instead of at the nerd level where we all like to talk. So we have to train people on how to go out and have the boardroom conversation instead of the server room conversation, right? And that's another place where those numbers aren't reflected in missing cybersecurity jobs or empty cybersecurity jobs. But those are jobs where cybersecurity has to be part of the conversation, and someone has to know how to speak about it in the language of their customer, how it applies to their business. And that's a whole other skill set that we have to teach, which is kind of part of why we grew from Empath Cyber, which is how this company was started, into just Empath, because we know we're going to have to teach every skill across the entire MSP ecosystem. So we've got to teach service managers, we've got to teach salespeople and account managers and VCIOs. Oh, and yes, we have to teach help desk and cybersecurity people as well.
It's a very unique positioning. Thank you, Wes, Kyle, and Alex for that. So I guess what I'm beginning to appreciate now, your strategy. You say, well, wait a minute, you gotta fix all this stuff first, right? Before we start going out after all this new business with maybe a new technology or a new service that we, still need to figure out how to do. And I guess my kind of gut response is, what about, how much of a factor does the unknown of cybersecurity or the risk of delivering that service and adding it to your portfolio affect MSPs in their desire to move forward and their approach in moving forward, as they consider all these things? I mean, what do you guys think?
I would love to take this one. So one of these things that you guys may not know about me is I'm a firm believer in accountability. And the reason for this is when I ran an MSP, one of the things I always talked about with my team was if you touch it, you own it. The second you get involved, you're never giving that back. And in 2015, when I spun up an MSSP to complement my MSP, we had a lot of conversations on, okay, this thing's coming out. We need a SIM. Because we had a lot of law firms that were getting requests for this types of monitoring, kind of like Wes was talking about with the banking world. And we didn't want to touch anything because we knew the second we touched it, we are now going to be in some compliance space to our client, not necessarily regulation, but where I had people that didn't know what they were doing. Now my business is at risk. I now need to report to my shareholders that, hey, we're getting sued because some tier one guy went and just told, hey, Mr. Client, I can go ahead and set up this cyber training or this EDR product that's on the market, and we don't know what to do with it. So kind of the short answer to your question is we need to get really good about doing the IT and be really purposeful that we are now going to spend R&D dollars, right? This is true product development dollars to build a cybersecurity product that we're not going to build through cash flow. We're going to build through investment dollars. And if we can get into that perspective of this is an investment to build a product or a separate company like I did, now I need an ROI on that product. How many units am I going to sell of that cybersecurity process? And one thing that Alex West and I have spoken a lot with Reg Harnish over at Orbital Fire was at some point, some MSPs simply do not have the capital or time to build a cybersecurity product. So they need to be very vulnerable and open about that position so that they don't accidentally touch that and become liable to their client. It's hard to, right? There's a lot of FUD out there that makes us feel like we have to own it when we need to be trustworthy with someone to help us, our clients, with that whole relationship. So that's where sometimes we have to bite our lip and go, you know what? I need a partner to do the cyber for us.
Yeah. And let's face it. I mean, every MSP has a product that's 80, 85, 90% ready to go to market, and we're out in the market with it. It's the way technology works, right? It moves fast. It's as the minute you've got it nailed down, it's moving again. So we're never going to be to a place where the product is done and ready, but we should also never be in a place where we stop working on it. And that's where continuous education for the life of the MSP, it's just got to be part of the culture.
You know, we're talking about the skills gap. We're talking about the risk inherent in specializing or just delivering security. I've been writing a lot in my blog recently about MDR because it's arguably the fastest growing segment of the fastest growing market in SMB IT right now. One of the things that people are doing, MSPs are doing, in response to the skills gap and the risk issue, is outsourcing some of that security function to somebody else. And that raises the question, how much should I outsource? How much shouldn't I outsource? I would love to get input from you folks on how an MSP should think through that balance.
I'll take the first swing at this. So we built something. We'd be happy to share it with you. You can link to it in the show notes or whatever if you want to. But Kyle and Alex and I built a cybersecurity revenue model that basically kind of shows what should, generally speaking, what should MSPs be doing according to where they're at in their growth stage? Because let's be honest, a $50 million PE funded MSP is probably going to be doing things a lot different than a sub $1 million single owner MSP. Yet the requirements of the client might be very one and the same. If you are working for a CPA firm, they have FTC safeguards on top of them. There are things that they have to do, period. And so there are certainly, I think one of the things that's important is understanding my client and knowing what am I required to deliver for them, whether they recognize that or not. What is it that they need so that I'm not guilty of negligence, that I'm doing the right thing for them? And then once you understand what the deliverables are, then you have the conversation of what am I capable of doing? And really, to Kyle's point, we should actually know that before we're even talking to the client. We should understand, here's what we're capable of doing. I'll just give you an example. Almost zero MSPs have the capability of building out an internal MDR, right to your point, Rich. And the reason for that is I know this from having built one. Your minimum requirements, just from a human capital perspective, is somewhere around 12 to 13 security analysts. And that's a skeleton crew of roughly 2 on shift at a time and hoping no one gets COVID-19, right? That's the hope. Because the second one person gets sick, you're now underfunded. And how many people can afford $120,000 to $180,000 fully embedded SOC employee?
How many MSPs don't even have 12 or 13 employees total?
Yep. So
right?
we just can't do it. So now it is predicated that you come back and say, well, then what does this look like for us? And I think it's important for MSPs to come forward with this and understand, to Kyle's point, there's just certain things that we can't do, that we won't do, that we shouldn't do, that actually introduce more liability. And then I think what's important is really building what's called a shared responsibility matrix, and really being very clear with the client. This is what we do, this is what you do, and this is what our third parties do. And we've documented this, and we understand this, and we've communicated this, because this is the way that we do modern service delivery.
I'd love to take advantage of the brain trust that the three of you represent and ask you, some very fundamental questions for an MSP that is struggling to get a handle on their business. So, I'd love to have just an open conversation about, hey, if you have an MSP that says, boy, I need help in getting a handle on my organization, where would you start your assessment, and what are the low-hanging fruit things that you would identify to have them work on? I know that's a very broad question, but
It's okay. I think this is a Kyle question. This is right in his wheelhouse.
Yeah, let's go.
Oh, God. And I'm going to have to get nerd on this one. So I do this a lot. And as nerdy as it is, the very first thing I do is always pull out the P&L and I look at the last 18 months of their cash flow. Why? Because the one thing you will hear symptomatically is, I don't have time. I don't have time. I don't have time. And what is time in a business platform? It is money, right? It's where our margins. What am I spending? And nine times out of 10, it's one of two things. It's either the very first and foremost, it's going to be that we're not working on the right things at the right time. We're just over delivering our services, right? There's the efficiency of what we deliver is not there. And you'll see this symptomatically in your basically cost of goods, your utilization. You're going to see that their dollar of salary to dollar of revenue is extremely unbalanced. So we need to get that back on track to say, hey, are we doing what we're saying we're doing? And are we prepared to have those meetings with our customers to say, hey, yes, we can do that, but it will cost you extra. Or it will have to be something that we offsource to someone that is a third-party partner in this relationship. And then on the other side of the fence is you're not charging enough, right? With raising inflation and raising cost of living, or of your business, right? As you start needing middle management and you start needing extra layers, right? The military only has 7 to 8 direct reports for every single commanding officer. Why is that? Well, our short-term memory can only hold 7 bits of information. So if I can only handle 7 bits of information, right, this whole scale and recruitment process, I need to be able to build into my business a pricing structure that's going to allow me to have those middle management layers, right? As I get bigger, yes, my price has to go up. So what you'll see in this normally is sometimes your margins of each of your clients, right? Looking in those agreement margins. That's the very first thing I always have to tackle, because when I'm in these relationships with these MSPs that want to grow fast, I need that ownership, that leadership team to have time to work on the business, right? Not on the clients. So before any of this happens, right, then you have to understand, how do I read a P&L? I get some of the best value out of MSPs just teaching their service managers and their tier 3 guys what a P&L is. Just that open book meeting, they sit there and go, oh my God, I understand timesheets. Like the whole world opens up. But the problem is that most education in IT right now is geared towards internal IT, enterprise IT, system administration, right? You don't have to worry about a P&L when you're a sysadmin. So how do we start to tailor that traditional IT knowledge and education, but loop in the actual MSP aspect of, we are a product, we are not talent?
Yeah, no, it's that's where I start too. I mean, understanding, what some of the challenges I find is the MSP doesn't really understand what their total cost of service delivery is. Like, they're just winging it and then adding, and over the years, right, they're adding more services and solutions to their stack because they want to do right by their client. But like you said, they're not increasing their rates. And because they don't really understand what their total cost of service delivery is, down to the fully burdened cost of labor per each technician that touches that ticket, then it's hard. It's kind of it's a guessing game.
Yes, the service model was one of the best things for us, but it was also the worst thing for us, because it allowed us to communicate better with our clients by giving them an all-you-can-eat OpEx type service model. But at the same time, that transition back in 2009, 2010, when we all learned it, that education now has just been, you have to do this because that's what we all do. And you lost that education of, well, part of how we figured out this $150 a user a month pricing was based off a fixed set of costs. So now when you try to cram every endpoint into there, because we have, I'm going to just say it, we have a vendor market that understands they can just tell you, buy our tool, we'll make you 10% margin of 50 cents. And you think I'm going to put it in there because it's going to make me more money. Well, you just blended margins now to where you are making less money because you didn't really ever revisit your actual product costs.
Well, and you're getting deep into the P&L and all this. You got to realize most MSPs started like me. It was like, oh, I can fix grandma's computer and she'll be happy with me. Oh crap, I got a business customer. Got to learn how to handle them. Oh, now I got another business customer because I managed to not screw up the first one and they referred me to somebody. And before you know it, we're a business to business shop. And we don't know the difference between a P&L and a balance sheet. And somebody has to sit you down and educate you and help you learn those things. And it's just not something that the average IT engineer went to college for. We're not prepared for this. And I give a lot of credit to Barry McKinley and Josh Peterson over there for sitting me down and kicking my tail back in 2009 or 2010 or whatever, and helping me figure those things out because I didn't know. I had no idea what I was up against. And, we did what everybody else did. We went and took our biggest customer and said, we're going to move you to this managed services thing to standardize your cost. So we went back 12 months. We averaged out how much money they spent with us every month. We divided that by the number of endpoints and by 12 months. And that was their per endpoint price. And I lost my ass on that for 5 years before I ever got it right. And everyone has been through that journey. Hopefully, those who are still on the journey can benefit from those of us who did it wrong and learned a lot of lessons in the school of hard knocks.
This is why I love
the latest data from Service Leadership, which is part of ConnectWise now, shows that more than 25%. I put it that way because it's the bottom quartile of MSPs, and then bleeds up a little bit into the next quartile up. They're all underwater. They're losing money, even in this market, which is so friendly to MSPs. And it goes straight to what you're talking about. All of you are talking about there. If you don't know how to read a P&L, you don't know your margins, you don't know what you're spending, et cetera, of course, you're going to find yourself in that situation.
And what's funny about that data, Rich, as I've also dove into it, is a lot of them are losing money because of professional services projects. We've all gotten so obsessed with the all-you-can-eat mentality that we forgot where we came from, which was the VAR world, and we forgot how to sell projects, and we just thought, oh, I'm just going to take a loss on projects because the client's paying me monthly. We justify this with some backwards napkin math, but it's just hilarious to see that we've come full circle.
And this is great conversation, team. So all you can eat doesn't mean all you can eat. All you can eat means all you can eat within the scope of work. That's what it is. And so
this is all you can eat salad bar, not steak and ribs and lobster, right?
Exactly, right. And scope creep and scope seep is another, I say, look, there's 3 areas where an MSP can be tremendously successful or lose their butt. The first area is in service desk, right? Not doing that properly. The second area is in project management, right? Change management, risk management, all that stuff. And the third is in sales engineering, solution scoping, not getting that stuff right at the very beginning. And Alex, I love that you brought up, my favorite, cringy term, blended margin.
Oh, no, that's Kyle. I don't use
that was Kyle. Oh my goodness, blended margin. That is, that's the first thing that, we have to like break apart, because we'll find something in there that drags all of the profit out. And then we just, when you identify, you go, stop doing that thing first. Right. And all of a sudden, oh, wow, things look better all of a sudden. Right.
Which this comes full circle into the cybersecurity conversation of, right, until you understand that a lot of the nerd speak that I went through, and I love that Alex is part of this team because I get a little overboard when it comes to that. But you don't even know your current costs. How are you going to build a product and manage that cyber product that is now going to have more inherent risk of your entire business, right? If you can't even buy yourself 10 minutes to think about it.
So on the topic of security, people think security, MSPs think security these days. They immediately think as well about cyber insurance. I would be remiss if I did not take advantage of the fact we've got somebody on the panel here who's on the board of advisors at Fifth Wall, which is a cyber insurer. Wes, you have a really kind of a unique perspective. You work with Fifth Wall, you work with a lot of MSPs, you work with vendors, you kind of see this issue from all sides. Give folks your perspective right now on the state of play in cyber insurance, where things are now. And then if you have any thoughts about where you see it going over the course of the next year or so, what are those?
Yeah. Boy, what a time. So when I left ConnectWise, really wanted to help solve cyber insurance, and a good MSP friend of mine, Dustin Bolander, said, "Hey, I want to introduce you to these guys called Fifth Wall. I think you really like them. They're really trying to, be attuned to the channel and figure out, what does this look like in the channel?" I'm like, well, I want to talk to them because it's less about Fifth Wall, but more about, at the time, we hadn't really seen any of the carriers show any interest in the MSP space. In fact, they treated us like we all had leprosy. They backed away as far as they could. And in 2021, when I first started getting involved, did you know there's of the 75 or so carriers that can write into the US marketplace, only 6 of them, 6 would even insure an MSP for what's called tech E&O, like technical errors and omissions. That's how many carriers walked away from MSPs because of what happened in 2020, 2021. Some of those breaches were real big deals, and it really caused significant pause from some of those carriers. And they just said, we're not touching it. We don't know what to do with it. You combine that with all of the data, and it shows very strongly. I think we saw loss ratios somewhere around 72%. And just so everyone knows, a loss ratio is a very simple metric that all the carriers follow. And that's basically for every dollar that I bring in, how many pennies go out the back door in losses. And we're not talking about cost of insurance, we're talking about losses. The one thing that carriers really want to stop, the one thing they don't always have their finger on the trigger of exactly what that is. So when you see 72% loss ratios, and you see that the industry average for insurance across the board is around 15%, now we know we have a major, major problem. And part of that problem was the carriers in the early days had no idea how to rate cybersecurity. And they're looking at the SMB market pre-2018, and they said, what could possibly happen? Looks like ransomware is going to cost $10,000. So sure, we can write a policy for $1,000. I mean, what could go wrong here? Based on their current data, they weren't wrong, but they didn't understand what was coming, right? And so you see what happened in 2021, 2022. One thing that was interesting is the conflict in Ukraine was very interesting because we saw a bunch of pullback on the Russian and Ukrainian threat actors because they were really focused on themselves. That's all come back to life again. In 2023, we saw the end of 2023, we saw a huge spike in increased costs from losses again. So the carriers got a very temporary reprieve through most of 2022 and early 23, but that's all kind of flipped again. And so when you look at what the carriers have been doing, it's interesting. You got to keep in mind the insurance marketplace is half a millennia old. So it's an ancient industry. And they've typically always worked on good faith. This idea of like, you tell me what car you drive, you tell me how many miles you're going to drive, and then I'll do the rest of the data because I know where you live, et cetera, et cetera. They don't actually come out and say, well, let me test drive your car. Let me pop the hood and see what's under it, because they don't have to. They do this over and over. They work in good faith. Cybersecurity doesn't work this way. When you hand a questionnaire to a client and the client has to answer these things, like, do you have EDR rolled out? Do you have phishing and security awareness training? Do you have a identity management program rolled out? They're like, I don't know where this nerd stuff is. Sure. Yes, no. I don't know. I mean, what does that even matter? Come on. All they're thinking is, shut up, nerd. I don't want to deal with that. And so this has caused a major problem for the carriers because they can't rate very well. They can't actually have good insights into what is a good client and what is not. And they've treated everyone in these same buckets. And they finally learned, the way one school system does security and does IT is wildly different than the next. I can't just say all school systems are, this level of risk. And so that kind of takes us up to where we're at today. The carriers have woken up to this, but they haven't figured out yet, how do we actually rate and understand each of these clients? Right now, what they're doing, some of them are doing some things like external scanning. So like do vulnerability scanning externally. It gives you a certain amount of value, but not enough. And so what we're going to see in 2024, and I actually know this because I'm working with some folks that are doing this with Fifth Wall, is what we call constant or behind the scenes underwriting, where we're actually doing this from a continuous perspective. and we're looking behind the firewall, so to speak. We're actually looking into the actual what's happening in the organization. So I'll give you a quick example. We're looking at EDR. Are there actually any EDR alerts? Are there actual critical vulnerabilities that have been discovered that have not been patched within X number of days? The carriers are moving to this direction where they have this automated continuous underwriting so that they now know, not just now when we signed and binded with a client, but we actually know through the life of the policy how you're doing. And that's the world we're coming to. And I actually think that's a good thing because it stands well for MSPs to be able to stand in that gap and say, see, client, that's one of the things you get out of this. That's a measurable difference that we're providing for you, that we're giving you, that we actually see that you're compliant to the security standards. And when things change, we're adaptive and reactive to it. And we get you back to a clean bell of like security hygiene. And so that's kind of what's happening in the insurance marketplace.
Well, and it's really cool. Imagine a world where an engineer makes a mistake, right? I turn MFA off on Wes's account one day when I'm troubleshooting something, and I forget to turn it back on, right? And now continuous underwriting goes out and picks that up and emails the client and says, "You'll lose your insurance if you don't turn MFA back on Wes's account." Now we catch things, right? And they're not all there yet, but this is where that industry's going. It's going to be really interesting.
Boy, holy cow! I'd hate to be the MSP in that relationship, because then the clients will be like, "What? Why am I hearing from my insurance carrier? You're fired, right?"
Well, there's a world where the MSP has access to the same tools that the insurance carrier does, right? And time to catch and remediate those things.
Well, I think it's one of those hard balancing acts because as an MSP, yes, you're 100% right, Eric. Having that policing is tough because you're just trying to keep your feet under you. But from an SMB perspective, it's one of those like I need this to make sure there's some counterbalance to who's watching and making sure my customer
Trust but verify.
It is a trust but verify thing. But then lastly, as MSPs, I know one of my clients was talking about their E&O rates they were getting were like $8,000-$9,000 a year when it used to be $1,000-$2,000, right? If we want a world to where our pricing can go down, we have to let them kind of see behind the curtains because they need to trust that we aren't just going to be negligent with their policies.
It's that thing that they have you plug it in your car that shows you don't drive like an idiot, right? There's a reason I don't let them plug it in my car.
Oh, mine has to have me blow into it before I can start it. No,
that's it's a different thing. It's a different thing. But I don't want to plug in a thing that's going to make my rates go up, right? Hopefully we can plug in a thing that shows what we're doing and actually allows our rates to go down.
Yeah, don't misunderstand me. I was joking about being the MSP in that situation. You've got to bring it, right? If you're going to sell this, like what we, the tone of the conversation around cybersecurity, if we've been talking about, is you better know what you're doing and you better have your ducks in a row. So
last thing I'll say on that real quick, Eric, is it's one of the biggest, it is actually the number one driver of change right now in the industry. I was talking to Connor, the CEO of Finn, just the other day. He said, "Wes, do you know the number one reason for inbound leads coming in to talk to us is cyber insurance?" We're talking to MSPs who are like, my carriers are forcing it. Talk to Adam Slutskin over at CyberFox. He said the same thing. He said the number one driver of growth for us right now is cyber insurance. So it's this teeth that exists down market where the client's like, well, if I have to have it, I guess I have to do this. And so it's really interesting to kind of see how that's really taken shape. And I think it largely, not entirely, but largely in a good way.
Yeah. And that leads to my next question is, we're seeing a lot of vendors kind of pulling together portfolios of services they're acquiring, they're building internally in an effort to say to MSPs, hey, if you sign up for our package of services, then we've already got these cyber insurance carriers agree to give your clients preferred, quotes for their rates and things like that. Let's talk about that for a bit. I mean, that's very interesting to me. And now that you've raised this, this, you're seeing what's happening and sharing with us that, hey, these carriers are going to start monitoring this stuff directly, right? So I'm an MSP, like how, these are a lot of choices that I have. Let's dive deep into that for a second. So now we've got these vendors that are trying to put this together and signing agreements with these carriers for favorable rates for their end customers. And then the carriers are also going to be kind of monitoring the back end, kind of a continuous adjustment of rates and risk based on risk profile up and down. That's a very interesting topic of conversation.
Yeah, let me take the first part, and then I think Kyle's going to have a very strong opinion on the second part. So the first part of this is, I'm not opposed to alliances being formed up here. I think to a large degree, some of it makes sense, right? If the carrier is going to put money on the line, and they're going to say, look, we're going to cover this risk and the aftermath of an incident, we should have the rights to say we want to look at and reward certain vendors that we've had insights into that have agreed to work with us and given us some visibility back into what's going on there so that we can reduce our loss ratio. And if they actually have the science behind it to prove that vendor X over here is actually a lower loss ratio than vendor Y over there, doesn't necessarily mean X is better, but it means just from a data science perspective, it actually is operating efficiently and effectively. So I understand that point of view, and we're actually doing some of that right now with some of the continuous underwriting that we're building. We're actually doing some alliances. So I'm okay with that. But I think to the second part of this, and this is where Kyle's going to come in, that doesn't necessarily mean it's beneficial to the MSP. The MSP needs to look at that and say, does that make sense for us from a profitability perspective? Is that the right decision? So, I think MSPs want to be careful that you don't just let the carriers trample all over you. But at the same time, I do think it makes sense for some of these alliances to come together when it can be shown to be purely beneficial to the MSP and the client as well.
Well, in reading between the lines too with this, we were talking about cyber and when is it okay to bring in a third party. I think this starts to put some accountability on some of these security providers where they're offering a managed EDR or a managed SIM or a zero trust type platform where now they are also in this loop, in this relationship of being accountable to the SMB and to the insurer. Because at the end of the day, there are some of those managed platforms out there, and I'm not going to name names, where their managed EDR is really just a checkbox. They're still throwing hundreds of tickets back onto the MSP, and they're really not delivering on the SOC part of the relationship. It's a fake SOC, if I would going to use a really easy term. So I think that's probably the most important part of this, is it gives some validity to these managed platforms to differentiate them.
Well, I want to take it a step further, though. Like, let's imagine, Kyle, you'll have strong opinions on this. Imagine a world where your insurance company, your partner, your customer comes to you and says, I'm insured by Travelers, and they tell me I need to use these 5 products. And somebody else comes to you and says, I'm insured by whoever, and they tell me to use these 5 products. Now, as an MSP, like, are we in a world where we feel like we need to switch products all the time or offer multiple products to be able to keep up? And so Kyle used the word partnerships earlier. I think this is a world where you need to identify who your insurance partner is, who the person is who you can rely on for this. This is a place where you must have a relationship with someone so that you can say, look, I understand you're $25 a month cheaper through whoever, but if you want to do business with us, these are the products we're going to deploy. And we know an insurance partner who will give you a reasonable, fair rate, may not be the cheapest, but it's fair, and who will work with the products that we work with, and build your stack around that, because the switching cost for your stack is so high.
Yeah.
And sorry, Kyle, I just want to throw that out there because I know, like, it's mind blowing to think I need 3 EDRs now because too many insurance companies.
Yeah, that's not good, right? And I want to be real clear here. I'm not a fan of the carriers. The carriers are not if you're an MSP, listen to me when I say this, the carriers are not your friends. Many of the carriers are starting to compete with you. They're starting to buy MSPs. They're actually going to your clients and saying, why don't you think about using our security services now that you have our security coverage from insurance? So they're not your friends. It's important to remember that. And it's important to remember to protect your business and your clients at all costs. And also, we're also seeing a whole bunch of warranties, like cyber warranties, come out. I'm not against cyber warranties, but same thing applies, right? If they're saying we're going to give you a warranty for X, Y, and Z dollars if you have this and this in place, same thing goes. You should look at that and vet that and say, well, when does this warranty pay out and when does it not? And how much is it going to cover? Unfortunately, most of the warranties that I'm seeing coming out are nowhere near the cost of a cybersecurity incident, right? And so you also have to weigh those things in as well. So I just want to be real clear here that, like, I'm a big fan of how cyber insurance is changing the game, but it is not all in your favor, and you need to be able to be shrewd around that.
I've got one last question for you guys, and it's a little bit of a shift here. So I'd like your perspective and feedback on guiding an MSP that is being asked by their client to fill out this carrier questionnaire for their cyber liability insurance policy. Like the first thing I always say is, hey,
Don't.
when there's that line item that says who's responsible for cybersecurity, don't put your name in there. That is your client's responsibility. But let's give the MSPs a little bit of guidance on how you would ask them to analyze, assess, and complete that document, because there's risk there, right?
Sure. Yeah, I'll handle this one. So this is a very common question that we get asked, and we actually even cover this in the cyber insurance boot camps that we do. So ultimately, at the end of the day, when the agreement, the questionnaire, and the insurance is bound between the carrier and the client, at the end of the day, it's always bound between the two. So if there is a third party like an MSP that's involved, I'm not saying there couldn't be liability and there couldn't be a lawsuit. There could be if the MSP signs it all. But first, recognize legally it's bound between the two. But absolutely, the MSP should not be in the business of filling that sucker out and giving it back to the client. And that's the knee jerk of the client. They go get this 10-page questionnaire with these gobbledygook terms. They say, hey, nerd, go fill this out for me. I don't get it. And just tell me what's what and make sure they're all yeses so I can sign and get my insurance, right? So it puts you in a rough position if all of a sudden you've been so reactive to this conversation that they shove a 10-pager at you and expect all yeses and then get angry at you when your nose across the board and they get rejected from coverage. Believe me, I've seen it happen over and over and over. And so I think what's more important is getting really proactive with the client and making sure they understand why cyber insurance matters, making sure they understand what the cost of an incident would be, make sure they understand what the minimum requirements to be eligible for cyber insurance are, and then even having someone like Fifth Wall in your camp that you have on hot dial ready to go with the client anytime they need it. So that way, when the 10-pager comes in front, you're actually the one leading the question. So I do think also you certainly want to make sure, no, I'm not answering this for you. Will I work with you? Yes. Am I going to bill you for it? Yes. But let's sit down and do it. And let's do a cybersecurity insurance preparation. And let's go through all that. The Fifth Wall folks are great about that. They'll show an MSP how to do all of that. So I think that's how you have to handle it. If you're reactive, you're going to get yourself in hot water. You can't put your name on it. You can't take responsibility for it. You can help the client work on the questionnaire, but they need to be responsible for it. And you need to bill them for the work that you're doing on it.
But these are such a good opportunity. If we look at this from the MSP's perspective, what's the insurance company telling your customer? Well, you need to do all the shit I've been trying to get you to do for years, right? I mean, that's really all they're saying. So if we've been having fair conversations with our customers, this is a perfect opportunity. And we were just doing a cyber insurance boot camp down at CyberFox's corporate offices in early December, I think it was. And what we told everybody was go home, pick up the phone, call all your customers, let them know, hey, your 2024 renewal is going to come to you in the mail. You probably should reach out to your insurance provider ahead of time. Let's see if we can get a glimpse at those questionnaires so that we know what's coming and we can start to have this conversation, because I can guarantee you, Mr. Customer, with insurance spend being what it is, with loss ratios being what they are, there's going to be new requirements this year. So let's talk about it early so that you don't have 10 days to fill out a questionnaire and then I have to run out here and deploy a bunch of stuff and charge you a bunch of money. Let's talk about it early so we make sure we're ahead of deploying the things that they're going to require from you. And it's a great opportunity too, just to touch base with your customer. Hey, do you know what the dates are to renew your insurance? We should be talking about this 30, 45, 60 days out. Should we schedule a call? That's proactive stuff that MSP should be doing, and it's easy. It's so easy. So
I love it when I talk to the MSPs who get that. Because no MSP likes cyber insurance, but some of them understand this is a big opportunity as well as a burden, and they're taking advantage of it in exactly the way you're saying, Alec.
If you don't have a configuration in your ConnectWise or your AutoTask or whatever PSA you're using for your customer's cyber insurance contract with an end date that reminds you and creates a workflow that says, pick up the damn phone, then you're doing something wrong. The tool is there. Use the tool. It will make your life easy and it will make you money. Right? I'm going to steal from Sean Torres. Like, pick up the phone, it makes you money. There's just no excuse at this point. We know better.
Well, gentlemen, this was legitimately fun. I thank you so much for making time and joining us. This really was a blast. We got to have you back on the show and do this some more. Until then, though, for folks who are in the audience who would like to get in touch with you folks individually, learn more about Empath, just let folks know how to get in touch. Kyle, you're muted.
Just empathmsp.com. That's the place to go.
Okay. And then you guys are on the socials if people want to reach out to you individually?
Yeah, if you can't find us on LinkedIn, you didn't try.
Drop all that good stuff in the show notes. Thank you
Yes,
so
indeed.
much. This has been a very engaging and valuable conversation for our audience. Thank you.
Thanks for having
Loved
us.
it.
No, this was fun.
All right. Well, with that, we are going to take a break, folks. When we're back on the other side, Eric and I will chat a little bit about the conversation we just concluded here, maybe have a little bit of fun, wrap things up for you. Stick around. We are going to be right back. And we're back. Welcome to part 3 of this episode of the MSP Chat Podcast. Eric, I think we just set a record, certainly in the young life of this podcast. But we've done podcasts together before. I don't think we've ever had 5 people on simultaneously, counting ourselves. But did not feel too crowded at all. This was such an interesting conversation. I really, really enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it as well, Rich. I mean, we could have gone for days. I mean, the experience and the history and what Alex, Kyle, and Wes have seen through their careers in the channel. It is an endless pool to draw from. I think they could speak about any topic, in the channel and have some very valuable perspectives and guidance and advice. I really, really enjoyed it.
And we framed it as a security conversation, and a lot of it was a security conversation. But there are a lot of takeaways from this for me. But one of the big ones, essentially, is there's a lot you need to do in the business in order to be effective in security. So it's not just a question of what tools do I use, what techniques do I use to keep the customer safe. You got to get your help desk right before you can start to focus attention appropriately on a security practice. You've got to teach people how to sell it. It was just an interesting way of approaching the topic.
That was my biggest takeaway as well, Rich. And the way that it was framed was just so direct and effective. I mean, as MSPs typically do, they see, a need, an opportunity, and they figure, oh, we're just going to add that solution to our stack. And that's probably served us okay for the most part, but cybersecurity is a completely different animal because of the risk inherently involved in choosing the right packages or portfolio or solutions in your portfolio, your strategic partners, and your agreements with your clients, and what you're including in your SAL and how you deliver that. It is something that is probably the most impactful from a risk perspective to add to a MSP's solution stack than we've seen in a while.
All right. Well, you know what? That leaves us with time for just one last thing, Eric. And not all that long ago, and in not too distant past, you were at the Las Vegas Grand Prix, if I'm not mistaken.
We were at the Dallas Grand Prix. We did not go to did not go to Las Vegas, but we went to the Dallas Grand Prix.
Well, you've driven to Las Vegas before and back home, so you will appreciate this story here. So at the Las Vegas Formula One Grand Prix, someone named Shelby Easler was there to enjoy the show, got in the car to go back home to Los Angeles on I-15. There was a windstorm. There was some traffic on I-15 after the race. And so Google Maps took them off the interstate and onto a smaller road that was supposedly going to save them time. Shelby and a whole bunch of other drivers, and they're all kind of going, and suddenly this road becomes a gravel path, and then it becomes a dirt road, and then it becomes a dead end, and they're in the desert. Good old Google Maps kind of let them down. I've had this happen to me once before. I remember I was on vacation in Northern California with some friends, and I got in the rental car to go get something from the grocery store, and Google Maps sent me out into the middle of nowhere, and I had to figure out how to actually get someplace I needed to be. So, now in this particular case, because media attention was shown upon this story, Google apologized for the misdirection that affected so many people, said, we're going to make sure that particular detour doesn't show up in Google Maps again.
Yeah, I've had that situation too, Rich. As a matter of fact, I've had it on several different GPS apps that I use on my phone, and it's it's very nerve-wracking when you figure out, what, I have no idea where I am. But the first clue to me would have been gravel road, and then the second clue would have been Dirt Road. Yeah, that's how a lot of horror movies start, isn't it, Rich?
Yeah, exactly. But we just have such faith in Google. Google must know what Google is doing. So I'll just keep heading into the desert here, even though there's nothing on the horizon whatsoever. Well, folks, that is all the time we've got this week for you on the MSP Chat podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be back again in another week with another episode for you. Until then, if you are listening to the audio version of this podcast, you can find us on YouTube as well. If you happen to be watching the YouTube version, we are available in all of your favorite audio podcast venues. Either way, please subscribe, rank, rate, review, make sure that everybody else out there gets a chance to learn about this podcast and enjoy it the way you do. This show is produced by the great Russ Johns, ably assisted, by the way, by Riley Simpson. They do a phenomenal job on this show. They can do a phenomenal job for you as well because they are part of the Channel Master team. And if you want to learn more about Channel Mastered, you can find information about us at channelmastered.com. You can find my personal blog, Channelholic, at channelholic.news. Again, we thank you for listening, watching. We're going to see you again in another week. Until then, folks, please remember, you can't spell channel without MSP.